Hello, my name is Keith, and these are my stamps. Episode 41, Benin. Benin is in West Africa, and the name comes via the Portuguese Benin, their pronunciation of the Itsekiri and Yoruba word Ubinu, which was used to describe the capital of the kingdom, probably either meaning a meeting place or a place of anger and fighting. And the kingdom was named after the capital. The official language of Benin is French, but there are 38 national languages other than French, many of which I had never heard of course. For instance, Yom and Fudu, but there are also others in there, such as English and Arabic. Benin is bordered by Togo, Burkina Faso, Niger, Nigeria, and the Bight of Benin. That's the sea there in the south of the map. Bight just means a very open bay. It's 114,763 square kilometers. That's just over 44,000 square miles, which is roughly Ohio sized or a little larger than Bulgaria. The population of nearly 15 million, which is a bit more than Pennsylvania or similar to Sweden and Norway combined. This area with the black circle is the subject of the next map. The capital of Benin is Porto Novo, down there. The seat of government, not in the capital, is in Cotonou. Two other places of interest that come up in the history section. Abomey, there at the top of this map, but remember this is only the very southern portion of Benin. Abomey, that was the seat of the kingdom of Dahomey that gradually spread out. And the other name to watch out for is that one down in the south, Ouida, which is spelled in several different ways and probably pronounced in a completely different way to the one I've just done. This history section will be referenced later in the Dahomey episode, which will be coming up in a few months' time. So it will cover Dahomey and Benin. In the 1500s, the area that has become the Republic of Benin was divided into various empires, various small kingdoms, and different tribal areas. The Kingdom of Dahomey, which was a small area at the time, was established around 1600, traditionally by the king Huegbadja, and it spread out from Abomey, which was one of the towns and cities that I pointed out on the map just now. In the late 1600s, in the south in Ouida, the Kingdom of Ouida, so that was a different kingdom, they asked the Portuguese to build a fort, which they did, and the Portuguese named it São João Batista de Ajuda, Ajuda being the Portuguese way of pronouncing Ouida. In 1708, back to the Kingdom of Dahomey, Huegbadja's grandson, Agaja, significantly expanded the kingdom, conquering Alada and the Ouida kingdoms, although not the Portuguese fort, and the whole of that kingdom of Dahomey became a tributary state for the Oyo Empire, which was a big Yoruba kingdom in what is present-day Nigeria and Benin. However, it wasn't all of present-day Benin that was in this kind of tributary kingdom. An existing town in 1730 was renamed Porto Novo by the Portuguese due to its likeness to Porto in Portugal, and it was used as a base to send slaves to Brazil, alongside Ouida, which was also still being used by the Portuguese to send their slaves to Brazil. Agaja's son, Tegbesu, took over in 1740 and greatly increased the slave trade until it was the source of the greatest income to the kingdom. 1880, Gezo was now the king of Dahomey. thanks probably to a coup with the help of a Brazilian slave trader, Francisco Felix de Souza. And Gezo changed the slave trade slightly because he would only include enemies of the kingdom, not people from Dahomey, which was made up mostly of the ethnic group called Fon. And he also abolished human sacrifices of slaves. The other thing that happened during his reign was the challenge to the Oyo Empire. This was partly for a little bit of independence, but also to have a bit more control of the slave trade. And they did. The Kingdom of Dahomey did challenge and defeat the Oyo Empire. In 1830, Brazil's demand for slaves continued to increase, but Britain had started their campaign to abolish the slave trade, including sending ships to West Africa to cut off supply at the source, as it were. And Porto Novo was attacked because Rezo refused to stop the trade, as did other kings in the area. And Porto Novo continued sending the slaves and was attacked by British anti-slaving ships. And it asked for French protection, which it got. However, despite this, Dahomey, the Kingdom of Dahomey, which, to be clear, wasn't the same as the later Republic of Dahomey. It was a lot smaller and contained more or less in the central south area of the present day country of Benin. So that kingdom continued to attack Porto Novo, and in 1889, the Kingdom of Dahomey attacked a village that was under French protection and beheaded the chief, which didn't go down very well. And also, Dahomey attacked Cotonou, which had been ceded to the French as well. And the king at the time of Dahomey, King Benazine, refused to meet with the French, refused any kinds of discussions, and continued to attack Porto Novo and to attack Cotonou. And this led to two wars that were known as the Franco-Dahomean Wars, and the French won. They annexed the Kingdom of Dahomey and they installed Beanzin's brother as a puppet until France could achieve full control of the area, except for the Portuguese fort in Ouida. So the French finally got control in 1899, and then that was of the much greater area that it became present-day Benin. The territory was then known as Dahomey, or some kind of variation of that, until the Republic of Dahomey changed its name to Benin in 1975. The Portuguese fort was finally annexed by the independent Dahomey in 1961, although Portugal didn't formally recognise that until 1985. Benin, the modern country of Benin, has no historical relation to the Kingdom of Benin, which is in modern day Nigeria, but the country was named after the Bight of Benin, which I mentioned in the map, but the Bight of Benin was named after the empire, the Kingdom of Benin. So that's the link, but it's not in the same place, and it's not a continuation. Benin, the country, is not a continuation of that Kingdom of Benin that is in the news quite often to do with its stolen art treasures. The name Benin was chosen by the at the result of a Marxist coup in 1972, and it was chosen because it didn't have any specific relevance or importance to any ethnic group. It was seen as a neutral name, whereas Dahomey was seen as a continuation for the Fon majority, and the other ethnic groups didn't really go for that name. So this Marxist coup in 72 was the fifth in Dahomey's history, and it was led by General Mathieu Kérékou, and he became president and installed a one-party state and renamed the country as the People's Republic of Benin. Many official institutions were purged. In 1977, there was an attempted coup led by a French mercenary called Bob Denard. I read a little bit about his history, and it's an almost unbelievable life. He was involved in so much across so many different countries. It would take probably more than one episode in itself to talk just about him. However, he will return in the Comoros episode, if not before. During the People's Republic of Benin, opposition was suppressed, political prisoners were detained. The politicians who had been removed by the coup in 1972 were kept in prison from then until 1981. Elections were controlled, traditional religions were banned, and Benin received some support from other communist states such as Cuba, East Germany, the Soviet Union, and North Korea, especially. However, mismanagement, corruption, and a catastrophic economic situation in Benin, coupled with the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, led to the end of the People's Republic in 1990, and the name was changed to the Republic of Benin. Kirikou, who had instigated the coup in 1972, he stood for election and lost in 1991, and becoming the first president on the African mainland to actually lose power through an election. But he won again in an election in 1996, however, this time not as a Marxist, but as an evangelical preacher. The political problems in Benin continued and continue. Recently, there was an attempted coup in December of 2025 by a faction of the army that was repelled. However, it's still not politically stable. The stamp issuing history I'll mention at the start of showing the stamps, just because there are quite a few things to say. The currency is a little more straightforward. Until 1944, the French franc with 100 centimes, then from 1945 to the present, the CFA franc to 100 centimes. The CFA originally stood for the Franc des Colonies Françaises d'Afrique. That's the French African colonies franc. And in West Africa, this was changed to the African Financial Community franc, the Communauté Financière Africaine. For other countries in Central Africa, like Cameroon and Gabon, they use the CFA franc as well, but it stands for the Coopération Financière en Afrique Centrale. Same initials, just a different meaning. However, the two things are completely interchangeable and are usually just referred to as the CFA franc. One of the things about a hobby, and perhaps one like stamp collecting, is that you can often make up your own rules. So, for instance, I decide what I want to include in my main country album and what I want to put in a separate kind of back of the book. I've made those decisions. And also, I've made decisions about whether postal administrations are continuous or not, regardless of whether they were or they weren't. For instance, I, in my collection, don't separate stamps that inscribe Persia from those of Iran. That's all, to me, one continuous place. The same I do for the Soviet Union and Russia, which of course sounds ridiculous, but I do. But I don't when it comes to countries like Basutoland and Lesotho or Ceylon and Sri Lanka. They are in separate places in my collection. There's absolutely no logic behind it. It's just what I feel and what I want, which is, because it's my collection, okay for me. So, despite them being completely different entities, the stamps that I have as inscribed Benin, I've put together. So, as you can see on this stamp issuing history, this episode is covering the ones in red. The ones that are in black will be covered in a later episode called Dahomey. So, the first part is those stamps when it was still part of the French colony. Well, when it was becoming part of the French colony, as during the Franco-Dahomean Wars, and then we'll skip to when it was a name change from the Republic of Dahomey, even though that was independence. We'll skip to when it's the People's Republic of Benin. So, the earliest I have, and the only one from that first period that I mentioned on the stamp issuing history, is this one from the Mouchon type, which is typical of French colonial stamps. Sometimes they're this one overprinted, sometimes they have the name inscribed, as this one does. This is from 1894, and it is also available without the accent over the E. Now, for the second iteration of Benin, this is the People's Republic. So from 1976 was when the name changed, even though the coup was in 1972. The first one I have from that is this one, which is an overprint of a stamp from Dahomey. And it's also a surcharge changing from the 300 to 210 francs of a 1975 stamp celebrating the bicentenary of the USA. This one released in 1976, as was this one, a lion from the African Animals series. From 1977, the Europe Afrique stamp, which, to be honest, I had a bit of a hard time figuring out what Europe Afrique was. I kept getting sent to websites in German, which was not a great help. It appears to be a kind of trade organization based a little bit on the European Union, trying to link Europe with Africa, as the name suggests. And there were plenty of ex-French colonies that have issued stamps with Europe Afrique or Europe Afrique on it, like the Ivory Coast, Chad, the Central African Republic, and so on. This is from the History of Aviation set, and it was the disappearance of Nungisa and Collie in 1927. Nungisa was a World War I ace pilot and adventurer who went missing with his co-pilot Francois Colli, missing presumed dead in 1927 while they were trying to make the first non-stop crossing of the Atlantic, something that Lindbergh did just 2 weeks after they went missing. First anniversary of the death of Mao Zedong, perhaps a nod to some of the support that the People's Republic of Benin was receiving at the time. And this is from Historic Museums of Benin, the Ethnographic Museum in Porto Novo, showing a Gwelede mask. 1978, the first anniversary of the death of Abdoulaye Issa. He was a founding member of the ruling Party of the People's Revolution of Benin, who was killed the previous year in a car accident. This was for the third African Sports Games in Algiers. Benin did not win any medals at those games. And the 75th anniversary of the Wright brothers' first flight. Into 1979 now, and the International Year of the Child. There was a set of flowers. This is a water lily. These two are for the OCAM conference in Cotonou. OCAM stands for the Organisation Commune Africaine et Malgache, which is the African and Malagasy Union, which was an active organization from 1961 to 1985. That one is for the bicentenary of the death of Captain Cook in Hawaii. Don't think that had much to do with Benin. Then some fauna of Benin, and the 20th anniversary of the Posts and Telecommunications Office. Into 1980, the 20th anniversary of the international campaign to save the monuments of Nubia during the construction of the Aswan Dam in Egypt. This was a monument erected in Cotonou in the wake of that failed coup attempt that I mentioned earlier, led by the French mercenary Bob Denard. It was repelled with the help of quite a few North Korean soldiers. The square was initially called Martyrs Square, but it's now known as Remembrance Square. This is a traditional musical instruments set, a type of drum, which is usually between 2 and 3 meters tall, which is between 6 and 9 feet. Fishing using fish traps, and the World Tourism Conference in Manila. From 1981, a couple of stamps. This is the common water hyacinth. Although native to South America, it's a very invasive species and can be found worldwide now. And a cat from the Domestic Animals series. From 1982, the 20th anniversary of John Glenn becoming the first American to orbit the Earth. The World Cup in Spain. The second and the third ones there were a reissue with the result on. The first one saying that Italy beat West Germany, and then the one at the bottom giving the top three: Italy, West Germany, and Poland. And then we have a painting by Manet of his friend Monet and Monet's wife on their studio boat on the Seine. From 1983, French President Mitterrand, he visited Benin, and he was the first French president since the renaming of the country in the coup. And here he is there with the coup leader Mathieu Kérékou. And this stamp, also from 1983, shows part of the West African traditional religion Vodun, which is practiced in parts of Benin, Togo, Nigeria, and Ghana. The Zangbeto, which is what's shown on the stamp, they are guardians of the night, kind of like a nocturnal police. And if you want to see them in action, if you go to the Wikipedia page for Zangbeto, there's a short video there showing them dancing around. 1984, the UPU conference in Hamburg. And in 1985, there was an overprint of a 1971 stamp from the Republic of Dahomey days. And this stamp had a very long life. As I say, it was first issued in 1971, this overprint in 1985. There was another overprint in 1996 as the Republic of Benin, and then again with a surcharge in 2009. And the other stamp from 1985 is the 25th anniversary of ASECNA, which is the Agency for Aerial Navigation Safety in Africa and Madagascar. The only one I have from 1986 is this Hemanthus flower, found mostly in the Cape area of South Africa. Then there's a jump in my collection from 1986 to 1995, and 1995 coincides with Benin going from issuing between 30 to 60 stamps per year to issuing well over 100, nearly 200 each year until 2000. And it also is the name change from the People's Republic to the Republic. And many of the issues that were in this kind of new expanded regime had very little to do with Benin. So these were the Atlanta Olympic Games. Benin did send 5 athletes, 4 men and 1 woman, all in the short sprint events, and they've so far never won a medal at the Olympics. We have the West African elephant. Benin, one of the most important populations of West African elephants in its northern areas. The dragon arum, which is from the northern Mediterranean, and then a set of African orchids. Into 96, and as you can see, there's probably one that links to Benin. The others are a little bit tenuous. From 1997, we've got the coat of arms. There were some pretty much exactly the same, but for the date, you can see in the top right of the stamp the date. There were some in 95 and in 96. Here we've got some vintage cars, cacti. That one is from South Africa. A fish from the Red Sea. There was also in 97 a series about the history of boats, showing Roman galleys and so on. birds, not from Benin, dogs, horses. The final one there at the bottom right, this one, oh, wrong way, just by my head, is for the 10th anniversary of the Association of African Petroleum Producers, which Benin is part of. And I think the interesting thing here, one of the interesting things, is to look at the two stamps, the coat of arms and that one for the oil producers, and their postmarks, which are kind of look used, smudgy, not in the right place, and the other three, the cars, the fish, and the cactus, which are all obvious cancelled to order postmarks. Into 98, we've got the history of fire engines and yet more vintage cars. To 99, wildlife, which does link to Benin. There's pretty much all of those animals can be found there. Another series of orchids, another series of tropical fish. There's more birds, and the one in the middle at the bottom there, that's for the 50th anniversary of Children's Villages. Yeah, more birds. So there was an issue of birds in 1982, 1995, 1996, 1997, 1999, and this one in 2000. Not as a continuous definitive series, not like the Queen Elizabeth Machin ones in the UK, but as separate individual series. There were three different orchid sets in 5 years. There were three different tropical fish sets over the same period. So that was the kind of stamp production that was happening in Benin at this time. And my final one, my most recent one from Benin, is this one. It's a reissue of a 1999 stamp. The only change is the date, which, if you look very closely on the right near the bottom, is 2001, which is when this stamp was released. For the 40th anniversary of the Rural Development Council, which presumably should have been the 42nd because the original was released in 1999. So from 2001, except for a little peak in between 2008 and 2009, Benin has gone back to only issuing a small amount of stamps each year, which is probably why I don't have any after this particular stamp. So these are my stamps from Benin. My name is Keith. Goodbye.